Now let's talk about observational studies. So as we've been talking about experimental design, we know that our goal is to keep the treatment and control groups as alike as possible. And with controlled experiments, we know that the researcher is deciding how to divide the subjects into the treatment and control group, and that the best way to do this is to randomly do it. So the researcher can do this randomly or not randomly, but the ideal experimental design is the randomized controlled double-blind experiment. And with observational studies, we actually see something very different. In this case, the researcher has no power over the assignment into treatment and control. So, observational studies are not ideal because they're not random. Basically, the subjects themselves, or some people say fate, to determine who goes into the treatment group and who does not. The researcher kind of just observes what happens. And observational studies are done out of necessity. Whenever it's possible, it's best to do a randomized controlled double blind experiment. If you're wondering why, it's basically because our groups are guaranteed to be balanced as long as the sample size is large if we do the randomized controlled double blind experiment. So I'm going to say it's best to do them because they are random and we know the benefits of using randomization. And the main problem with observational studies, the reason they're done out of necessity, is because they can show association, but it's really difficult to make conclusions about causality just from an observational study. So, since the treatment and control groups just happened, they just occurred, we're just observing them, then they are often very different from each other. And our main goal isn't met. So these differences, they can confound, or sometimes we say they can mix up our results when you're trying to reach a conclusion. And these differences are called confounders or confounding variables. And you'll notice at the top of the note sheet that the second bullet point under controlled experiments is that randomized controlled double blind experiments do not have confounders. So, in other words, they do not have these differences between the treatment and control groups that can mix up our results, which again is why they're ideal. So I'm actually going to add to the question of why is it better to do these randomized experiments? I said, well, because they're random and they don't have confounders. So these confounding variables are very common in observational studies. And like I said, they're differences between the treatment and control group that can mix up our results. And good studies take great care to reduce confounding. So sometimes observational studies have to be done. Sometimes what we're studying is something that you can't assign people to do. And so the question is, can you get anything out of that? Is it just a bad study that you are going to throw away and not use the results? Or is there something you can do to kind of control for the confounder? And we're going to talk about how we can go ahead and do that. There are ways to deal with confounders. Also, confounders make it very difficult to prove causation by correlation or association. We know that correlation doesn't imply causation. So we need to think with an observational study, did the treatment cause the response or is it simply so associated with the response? And this difference is really key. So if the treatment truly does cause the response, which does sometimes happen, then it says there will be a causal link explaining why or how the treatment is causing the response. And I like using diagrams to represent the causal links and the confounders. So for the causal links, we have our treatment and our response, and they are directly related. So the causal link goes right in the middle, and it's the thing about the treatment that explains why it's causing the response. So if I was going to draw my arrows, I would say the treatment contains the causal link, and then the causal link causes the response. So we'll do an example of this in a bit, but this diagram is definitely going to help with that. The confounder is the opposite case. This is if the treatment does not cause the response. Well, the question is, why would the study look like the treatment is causing the response? And that's because of the confounder. So the confounder is this third factor that I'm going to put in the middle that is associated with the treatment. So I have my confounder, it's associated with the treatment, and it also causes the response. So when we're answering these types of questions, one little trick that I like to use is drawing these diagrams and kind of thinking about, okay, did the treatment happen first and then the causal link caused the response? Or is there this confounder that's related to both, and the treatment and response really aren't related at all? So let's do our very first example. Puzzle 1 says this is dealing with coffee and lung cancer. So studies back in the 1960s showed that coffee drinkers had higher rates of lung cancer than those who did not drink coffee. So because of this, some people identified coffee as a cause of lung cancer. Do you think this is true? And I would answer this question as, do you think this is true? They say statistics is never having to say you're certain. So I'm going to say maybe it's true, or there could be a confounder. That's pretty much my response anytime I have an observational study. So does coffee cause lung cancer? Maybe, or there could be a confounder. And in this case, basically what they did, this was an observational study. And a lot of times, if people don't know statistics, or maybe this was back in the 1960s, they just see this association and they automatically assume, okay, treatment causes the response. And they don't think about the fact that there's bound to be differences between people who drink coffee and people who don't that could be potentially related to lung cancer. So my treatment here is coffee. I'm going to go ahead and draw my diagram. And then my response is lung cancer. And in the 1960s, they thought, okay, we know for a fact that smoking causes lung cancer. So they thought maybe people who are smoking drink more coffee than those who don't. And when they looked at the data, they saw that that was an actual thing. So if I put smoking right in this box, we know that smoking leads to lung cancer. We know that smoking causes lung cancer. And when they looked at the data from the 1960s, people who smoked were more likely to drink coffee. So this was a classic case of a confounder. Coffee wasn't causing the lung cancer. If it was, there'd be some ingredient in coffee or something that happened when you drink coffee that would lead to lung cancer, but that wasn't the case. Really, it was the smoking that was mixing up our results and making it look like the coffee caused lung cancer. So you can see that this can be dangerous. Mistaking correlation and causation is the ultimate statistical sin. So we want to avoid that at all costs. Let's go ahead and look at puzzle 2. So puzzle 2 says a recent study was done and found that people who wear sunscreen regularly were more likely to get skin cancer than those who do not. So this goes against what doctors had originally thought. When I read this, I think, that seems like the opposite of what's true. So it tells me to answer the following questions based on the information given. First of all, what type of study is this? You always want to ask, was this experiment ideal, or was it an observational study? And remember, the randomized controlled experiment has the researchers randomly dividing people to, in this case, wear sunscreen and not. And there was no mention of that. So I don't want to assume that's the case. This was definitely an observational study because they were just observing people who wore sunscreen and people who didn't, and then looking at their rate of skin cancer. And then the next question is about the conclusion. Does this show that sunscreen causes skin cancer? Should I read this heading that says people who wear sunscreen regularly were more likely to get skin cancer and think, oh, I should stop wearing sunscreen. It's going to cause me to get skin cancer. And because this is an observational study, I'm going to say no, not for sure. Or I could even say the same thing as the last one, maybe, or there could be a confounder. So I'm going to say for this one, does the study show that sunscreen causes skin cancer? I guess I'll say maybe. I don't want to say definitely not, but I don't want to say definitely. So maybe, or the more likely thing is that there could be a confounder. All right, so we thought about the conclusion. Let's go ahead and check, is there a confounder here? So it says, based only on the information below, go ahead and classify the following as confounders, causal links, or neither. So I'm going to go ahead and use those diagrams to help me. We said that our treatment is sunscreen, and our response is skin cancer. So we want to make sure to answer these questions just based on the information given. This is going to be very similar to a lot of questions you'll see in this series, and I want you to use basically what we give you in the problem to answer the question. So I'm going to read this. It says chemicals in sunscreen. What is that? Is it a confounder, a causal link, or neither? When applying sunscreen to your skin, you're exposing yourself to certain harmful chemicals that may cause skin cancer. So if I make my box in the middle and put chemicals in there, I need to decide, are chemicals, is this a causal link? Is it something about the sunscreen that could be causing the skin cancer? Or is it a third factor that happens to be related to sunscreen and happens to cause skin cancer? And with this one, chemicals are an ingredient in the sunscreen or a part of the sunscreen. So a lot of times when that's the case, that's going to be your causal link. So you wear, in this case, think about the ordering. You wear the sunscreen, you put it on your skin, you get the chemicals on your skin, and then that's what could be causing the skin cancer. So this would definitely be an example of a causal link. It answers the question, how or why does sunscreen cause skin cancer? So this one has a direct relationship between the treatment and the response. We're not saying the arrows don't go the opposite way. We're not saying you get chemicals on your skin and are more likely to wear sunscreen. That doesn't make sense. It's that you put on the sunscreen, that gives you, that means that you're exposed to the chemicals, and then that gives you skin cancer. So this is how the causal link would look. The next one is genetics. So again, I'm going to make my diagram. I have my treatment, which is sunscreen. I have my response, which is skin cancer. And then I'm going to put genetics right in the middle. And again, I am definitely a visual person, so I like seeing the diagrams to help me figure out what's going on. And if I read what I'm given, it says cancer is known to run in some families, making it more likely for you to get skin cancer whether you wear sunscreen or not. So the genetics, they're saying your genetics can make you more susceptible to skin cancer. So I'm going to draw the line from genetics to skin cancer. And then do genetics make you wear more sunscreen? It doesn't say anything about that. That's not a thing. So there's no real connection between there. It says you're more likely to get skin cancer whether you wear sunscreen or not for the genetics, but there's no connection between the sunscreen. So I'm going to say that this one, because I'm missing one of the arrows, I'm going to say that this is an example of neither. It's kind of just a random fact about the response, but it really has nothing to do with sunscreen. And the whole point of the study is to figure out how sunscreen and skin cancer are related. So this is an example of neither. The next one is health problems. So I'm going to, again, make my diagram. I have my treatment, which is sunscreen, and my response, which is skin cancer. And I'm going to put health problems in the middle. And it says, studies have shown that too much sun exposure is bad for your health. All right. So this one, this one doesn't really say anything about skin cancer, right? I guess bad for your health. Maybe they mean skin cancer, but that's still, I'm going to put a question mark there. I don't really know the connection that there's trying to be there. And then for the sunscreen, it doesn't mention sunscreen at all. So again, a question mark. This is another example of neither. This is kind of just a random fact that isn't really related to what we're looking at. And then the very last one is fair skin. So again, my diagram, I have sunscreen and skin cancer. And in the middle, I'm going to go ahead and put this option, which is fair skin. And if I read this, I need to decide which way do I draw my arrows? Do these even connect? And it says people with fair or lighter skin get sunburned and therefore wear more sunscreen to prevent this. So they're saying people with fair skin are more likely to wear sunscreen, right? And then it says also people with fair skin have a higher risk of getting skin cancer. So people with fair skin are at higher risk for skin cancer. This is definitely a classic example of a confounder. It's a third factor that is making it look like sunscreen could cause skin cancer, but really it's that people with fair skin have a higher risk for skin cancer and are also more likely to wear sunscreen. So hopefully you can see the difference between this one, the fair skin, and the chemicals in sunscreen. So the chemicals in sunscreen are saying, what about sunscreen causes skin cancer? Whereas fair skin is a third factor that's related to both sunscreen and skin cancer. So, looking at this type of experimental design, looking at observational studies and trying to determine what is a confounder, what's a causal link, what's neither, this can be very difficult. And I think the diagrams help, but more practice is definitely what's going to be best for this. And hopefully, we'll see a lot more studies in this series and we'll be able to get more practice identifying confounders and causal links.